Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the Path Builder app. Welcome, children of the night, to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring. But, please, before you go, enjoy this new build for our latest Halloween horror, Mindwipe from Transformers.
The powers of darkness are a more powerful weapon than all the toys your science can muster.
This series remains my favorite franchise in all of existence, and I'm always happy when I get to explore a build for it through Pathfinder. These are likely better suited for Starfinder, but today's character fits nicely enough within the scope of this fantasy system, as we will see with a look at our build goals. Getting into the basics of it all, Mindwipe is a Cybertronian, a type of robotic lifeform who can transform from a humanoid bot mode into some sort of vehicular alt mode. In Mindwipe's case, he usually transforms into a giant mechanical bat, but he's shown up as a stealth jet as well. Among a race of technological beings, Mindwipe is an occultist and a mystic who seeks to contact the spirits and sparks of the long dead, though with little success. But while he hasn't actually been able to talk to the dead, he is a hypnotist, able to control the minds of the organic and mechanic alike with his gaze alone. This power of mental manipulation allows him to remove fear and shield the mind from other harmful effects, cause allies to turn against each other, and even remove and modify memories. These abilities also seem to afford him a strange nebulous sixth sense that helps to warn him of danger and other plot-relevant issues. When these abilities aren't enough, he is packing a Viper pistol, which is just a gun that fires a stream of paralyzing liquid. Some iterations of Mindwipe share a symbiotic connection with a humanoid alien named Vorath, a scientist who finds Mindwipe's esoteric pursuits to be a distasteful flight of fancy. Even when Mindwipe isn't bonded to Vorath, he often plays the role of scientist and inventor for the Decepticon cause, despite his tech specs listing his intelligence to be one of his lowest stats. In essence here, we are looking to build a bot with the ability to control minds with a hypnotic gaze, transform into a giant bat, and freeze people in place. Optimally, we want to include a little buddy for him, though I'm not going to be playing the headmaster aspect. Never been into that part of the franchise. On top of that, if you haven't already guessed it, Mindwipe is the vampire for our Halloween party. If the hypnotic eyes and the ability to turn into a bat weren't enough for you, he was portrayed with an accent based on classic depictions of vampires in various media. He's no bloodsucker of a bot, but he's built as best he can be, as you will soon see. The easy choice for representing this reviled robot is the automaton ancestry, so that's what we're going to start with. Unfortunately, none of the heritages really stand out to me, with the warrior heritage probably fitting the best just to make him a bit better at defending himself while unarmed. An all too common occurrence in the course of Cybertron's Great War. As an automaton, he does get an automatic boost to strength to facilitate messing it up in melee, but the free boost for his ancestry is going to charisma for the sake of his upcoming class. Further automaton features give him his automaton core, which simply defines him as a living creature despite being a construct, and then constructed body, which does give him a few protections based on this aspect. Normally, he would also have low light vision, but with the arcane eye ancestry feat, he will instead have dark vision. Mindwipe has appeared across multiple iterations of the Transformers franchises in the form of a nocturnal creature, and this serves to reflect that, if only slightly. A humorous aspect of Mindwipe is that he desperately believes that he can speak to the dead. He hasn't had any luck yet, instead just receiving Earth television broadcasts, but I think this gives us a good opportunity to use the false medium background. He's a bit more sincere than the background describes, but it's more of a wish on his end than anything else. This makes him trained in occultism and fortune-telling lore, and will also nab him the deceptive worship skill feat. With it letting him use his occultism to deceive others, you could play into the idea of this being an aspect of his hypnotic abilities, convincing somebody that he is on their side. For the ability boost from this, his first will be Charisma, because his intelligence is, again, one of his lower technical specifications. And then his free boost goes to Dexterity. He prefers fighting with a ranged weapon, and he's also a decent flyer, which does influence this. That brings us to Mindwipe's class, and what better choice for Hypnotist is there than Psychic? This will make him an occult caster, with plenty of mental manipulation to mess and maraud with, though the Unleashed Psyche isn't really representative of any of his particular abilities. We're looking at the Wandering Reverie for his subconscious mind, making Charisma his key ability score, and aside from being something a little different from past Psychics I've built, I like Fade into Daydreams possibly representing him drawing on his hypnotic patterns to dissuade attacks from connecting with him. For his conscious mind, Silent Whisper is definitely the way to go, with its focus on controlling and swaying minds. With this, it's probably a good time to start talking about spells. Firstly, Mindwipe automatically gains the Daze, Message, and Forbidden Thought cantrips. The last of these is probably truest to his hypnotic capabilities, and it also comes with a little bit of damage. That, Daze, and whatever other cantrips you pick are going to be his only damage for a bit, so keep that in mind when you're making your choice. These three cantrips can also be amped, increasing and adding to their effects at the cost of focus points, though they're already a little special thanks to some changes made by the Psychic class. Other options I'd look at are Figment to let him create some illusions, and then I'll actually leave the rest of his cantrips up to you, dear viewer. As for his first rank spells, he's getting Mind Linked right off the bat, but specifically and intentionally picks up Command as a spell that he gets to choose, allowing him to force a creature to obey his will, though it's really some limited options that he can enforce to start off with. I do want to mention that even with this new format, I'm not really intending to go into every single spell, just the ones that I want to talk about in regard to the build, and I'll probably bring up the spells that he gets automatically, at least as a quick mention. With our spells now secured, we set our sights on skills. Normally, Mindwipe would be trained in occultism as a psychic, but already got that from his background. This gives him training in an extra skill, meaning that he will be trained in acrobatics, crafting, deception, intimidation, and medicine. He snatches up some of these more cerebral skills, given his scientist role among the Decepticons, but Charisma still takes a lead in his build. His 4 free boosts will go to his Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and obviously, Charisma. He has a decent Dexterity so that he can use his ranged Viper pistol that we will initially represent with a crossbow. However, Mindwipe's focus will be on his spells, which he can enhance with his Unleashed Psyche, and also just create control effects with, debilitating his enemies. A fun aspect of this build is that a lot of it will be covered by our spells, which kind of frees up our feats for some more flavorful options. For example, 2nd level features the Familiar Master Dedication, to grant Mindwipe, well, a familiar. This is a classic vampire trait, and while it is a minor ability to start off with, we will eventually use it to resemble Mindwipe's binary bonded partner, Vorath. I'd probably go for Independent, Skilled, or Speech among the familiar abilities here, to represent this Nebulan scientist, who is likely to be disappointed in Mindwipe taking Schooled in Secrets as his skill feat here. This has a little overlap with Deceptive Worship, but has a few differences that make it worth it, such as letting Mindwipe use occultism to gather information about these cults and secret societies, or to infiltrate the non-religious organizations of this sort. As a psychic, Mindwipe then receives only a single spell with his level up, which he will use to pick up Soothe, as Mindwipe has used his mental abilities to bolster his allies before, and I like that here. The idea of him hypnotizing his allies to think that their wounds aren't that bad is a fun application of his powers. I suppose the big thing at 3rd level is signature spells, which will let Mindwipe choose a spell from each level to signature so that he doesn't have to learn the heightened version, and can just cast it by expending the proper spell slot. From his first rank spells, we'll go ahead and signature Soothe, since Command, for some reason or another, doesn't have the incapacitation trait. Not that I'm complaining, it just seems a little odd. The second rank spell he gains will be Clear Mind, a more restorative spell that will let him remove mental conditions that are afflicting others. This does use a counteract check, so its level does matter, which is why he'll be signaturing that over the Stupefy granted by his Conscious Mind subclass. Other choices for this level include a general feat spent on Incredible Initiative, so that he can act first and determine the first actions his enemies can take in a fight with his mental abilities. This is always a good feat to put on casters, letting them blast areas, or in Mindwipe's case, debilitate enemies, before the rest of his crew starts mixing it up in melee. For a skill increase here, will obviously become an expert in occultism, given the skill feats that he's already invested into it. For our fearsome fanged fellow at 4th level, he will take Enhanced Familiar, slap another 2 abilities into Vorath. I listed 3 of familiar abilities last time, so to add a 4th to that lineup, I think Familiar Focus synergizes fantastically with a Psychic, letting him use his Familiar to restore a focus point in the midst of combat. Given Mindwipe's fascination with mysticism, I at least like the idea of Mindwipe believing that he can read psychometric resonance. I don't actually think he can, but I don't doubt that he thinks he can. And maybe it's a little leaning into his ability to accidentally tune into waves from Earth TV shows. Like his personal favorite, My Mother the Car. My mother the car. My mother the car. For the single spell he gets at this level, Mindwipe's going to take Paranoia to start turning allies against each other, though it's a little less directed than I would personally like it to be. There's a couple of things coming online at 5th level. Starting with class features, Clarity of Focus will give him a 3rd focus point, while Precognitive Reflexes makes him an expert in reflex saves, letting him duck for cover when the Autobots open fire. His ability boosts will go to Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma, which will lead to him getting a skill increase. Given the Stealth Jet alt mode he used in the Bayverse, I feel a little compelled to make him trained in Stealth, whereas his actual skill increase will make him an expert in Deception, so that he can manipulate others without having to spend any of his spell slots. The Silent Whisper Conscious Mind grants him Heroism to hype up his fellow Decepticons, but he's still going to signature Phantom Prison, another incapacitation spell that I actually mainly want to simulate his paralyzing Viper Pistol. He can hit an enemy with this and make them believe themselves trapped and effectively paralyzed. Psychic proves the perfect pick for this sinister Cybertronian as he selects 6th Sense at 6th level, to represent that strange extrasensory ability that he sometimes demonstrates. This is a nice passive effect to let him detect haunts, meaning that he can instead be using an exploration activity like a Void Notice to take advantage of his small dip into stealth. Expanding on this ability to see beyond the normal ken of most bots is Aura Sight as a skill feat as well, letting him get a read on an individual by studying them for an entire minute without blinking. Which must be way easier when you're a giant robot without eyelids. This just gives him some fun information to play around with, and maybe take advantage of through his next spell, Hypnotize. The name of this spell does feel a little misleading, as it doesn't actually hypnotize enemies to obey our will, but it can leave them fascinated so that Mindwipe can try to sneak into a more favorable position and possibly limit the effectiveness of enemy casters. Now, in addition to Mindwipe becoming expert spellcaster at 7th level, he also gets his Shatter Mind cantrip, a nifty little area damage effect that he's otherwise lacking. It normally only deals D4s, but if Mindwipe amps it, he can crank that all the way up to D10s. And given his lack of damage spells, this is not a bad get. His Conscious Mind also supplies him with Telepathy, before he picks up, and signatures, Suggestion, to gain greater control over his enemies, though we're still really building towards actual dominance. For now, Mindwipe will simply master his occultism skill, and then take Fleet as his general feat, to make him faster and let him match the speed that his aerial forms afford him. Not to overload Mindwipe with will saves, but 8th level sees him take Brain Drain for his class feat. While he might not suck blood, maybe he can suck up some mental energy to give him yet another way to restore a focus point. His focus restoring effects are each once per day, but they're nice to let him get in some more amps because he does have some good ones. Looking into his skill feats, with all the eye stuff that Mindwipe has going on, and his general spookiness, it feels like it would be remiss of me not to take Intimidating Glare here. There's not going to be much intimidation in Mindwipe's kit, but he's got some good charisma and can still probably slip it in there now and again against weak-willed targets. Speaking of will saves, Mindwipe takes rewrite memory to do, well, exactly that. He specifically did this back in the day to Highbrow in the Transformers 1989 Annual, which I point out because I can't usually name these things with such specificity. I'm going to kick off 9th level with something kind of big. Mindwipe's ancestry feat, Arcane Propulsion. This lets Mindwipe spend 2 actions to transform into his alternate mode, and thereby gain a fly speed matching his land speed, which is another reason that I took Fleet earlier. Now, typically, Mindwipe transforms into a bat. His Bayverse version does see him transform into something that can do an F-117 Nighthawk, but as somebody who's maybe a little obsessed with Transformers, I'd like to posit my own suggestion for a modern alt mode, the Boeing MQ-28 Ghost Bat. This is a slick little aerial vehicle that keeps a flight capability and doesn't lose out on making him a bat, which I think is pretty fun. But before I get too deep down that trail, I'm going to reel it back in and mention that Mindwipe becomes an expert in fortitude saves, as well as a master of deception, before he takes and signatures subconscious suggestion, letting him set up a sleeper agent in the Autobot army. Synaptic Pulse from his Silent Whisper does kind of compete with this, being another incapacitation spell, but I think the ability to control others is a bit more important to him. Starting off with the ability boost for 10th level, which should look pretty familiar at this point, Mindwipe takes a boost to Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. With yet another intelligence boost, he'll become trained in Arcana this time, given his obsession with magic. His class feats will be incredibly familiar, so that Vorath now has 6 abilities. With 2 more to add, I'd look at Spell Battery, since Psychics don't get a lot of spells to start with, and then Second Opinion, so that Vorath can weigh in on Mindwipe's attempts to recall knowledge. On the topic of knowing things, we will use Disturbing Knowledge for his skill feat, letting him ham it up with his obscure knowledge to distressing effects. It's a little sad that this is 2 actions so that he can't combo it with a spell, but he'll be able to target multiple enemies with it once he becomes a legend in occultism, for a nice little debuff that he can throw out there. 11th level comes with a few class features that are mostly just increasing various proficiencies. Wall of Wills means that he's a master in will saves and gets a crit success whenever he rolls a success. He also gets weapon expertise, becomes an expert in perception with extrasensory perception, and finally takes a skill increase to acrobatics to become an expert in it. This will serve him when he's flying about in his alternate mode, but another very solid option is obviously going to be intimidation. He grabs toughness as his general feat, since he is in fact a big old robot who has survived a millennia-long war. Even with endurance as his actual lowest spec, I want to increase his survivability just a touch. We do crack in his 6th rank spells here, getting a quick little sending, and getting his Contagious Idea Focus cantrip, before taking Dominate as our actual spell. And folks, this is the big one. With it, Mindwipe can fully control a victim, turning them against their allies and otherwise enacting his vile villainy. Obviously, this has the incapacitation trait, so we are going to immediately signature it. Okay, Mindwipe's 12th level class feat is a silly little reference. Dream Guise is a strange ability, meant to confuse enemies as you merge and then separate from an ally, mixing up which of you is which, and the reason that I'm taking it is because that Mindwipe was, in fact, a combiner, being a component of Galvatronus in both the IDW and Earth Wars formation. He also takes Dubious Knowledge as a skill feat. Even when Vorath and Mindwipe can't figure something out between the 2 of them, they should be able to glean at least a little bit of info, thanks to their varied pools of knowledge. If you are remotely familiar with Transformers, you might know them to be pretty large compared to humans. Sometimes nonsensically so. In Mindwipe's case, we're going to represent that with the enlarged chassis for his 13th level Ancestry feat, making him the towering titanium tyrant that he is meant to be. As for this level's class features, Mindwipe gets a personal barrier that makes him an expert in unarmored defense, as well as weapon specialization to add some extra damage to his weapon attacks. We'll take another skill increase to acrobatics so that he can master it, which will play into his next skill feat. Given the focus that Mindwipe has on controlling and manipulating others, I wanted to take Deep Roots as his class feat at 14th level. I don't think I've ever taken this one, but it's a really nice way to sneak in some damage with a build that has a focus on control, like Mindwipe does. Now, that being said, I'm not a fan of this only happening on a critical failure. That's kind of lame, so Mindwipe will have to make sure to target the most susceptible victims that he can, looking for both less willful creatures and trying to lay out some debuffs beforehand. As promised, he's making use of his acrobatics skill to take up aerobatics mastery, making him a much more capable flyer. Mindwipe's no seeker, but he's a bot that was born with the innate ability to fly. It's taken us a while to get there, but it does feel natural that he would have something like this. 15th level starts with ability boost going to Dexterity, Constitution, Wisdom, and Charisma, and also comes with Mindwipe becoming a Master Spell Caster. He does also become a legend in occultism, fully steeping himself in the dark magic that he is so obsessed with. The general feat of this level will be spent on Die Hard, because Cybertronians in general are extraordinarily hardy individuals. It isn't crazy at this point in the franchise to see a Cybertronian losing an arm, only to turn it into an improvised bludgeon. A proud tradition in the series started by Mindwipe's fellow headmaster, Apeface. Though, Optimus has gotten in on it too once or twice. I'm not 100% certain on level 16's Psyburst, but it's a single action for some decent damage that Mindwipe can use to follow up a spell that can target reflex or will saves, finally netting him a tiny bit of variety. I was also waffling on Consult the Spirits as a skill feat. It feels wrong to take given his constant failure to actually do so, but at the same time I am kind of running out of skill feats, and particularly of those that draw upon the skills that he's invested in. I think he's earned this, and he might so occasionally get that failure, and pick up a stray broadcast instead. For 17th level, Mindwipe gains Fortress of Will. This makes him a legend in will saves, and also makes the will saves that he fails a bit less painful. He takes his skill increase to Deception to become a legend in that, and he finally gets some spells of note again. Telepathic Demand comes from his conscious mind, and with it being a way to control minds, I felt a little compelled to signature it. In addition to that, he will grab a 9th ranked Paralyze to freeze foes in their tracks, just like his Viper Pistol can do to his victims. His final ancestry feat will be Greater Augmentation, which doesn't do anything by itself, but will upgrade his arcane propulsion so that he can fly whenever he wants. He's finally got the gunk out of his T-Cog and can switch between alt modes on the fly to obtain that aerial advantage against his adversaries. As his 18th level class feat, I want to take All in Your Head, a reaction that lets Mindwipe make a will save against an effect that normally requires a Fortitude or Reflex save. I like to imagine that this is Mindwipe hypnotizing himself to overcome whatever situation he finds himself in. Then, with his legendary Deception, he can take up Reveal Machinations as a skill feat. This is a fantastic single action that will let him make an enemy frighten with a successful deception check, and perhaps leave them questioning just how much he's actually manipulated them or those around them with his powers. On more mechanical matters for our massive mecha, this is a great debuff to throw out before dropping a big spell. Make them question what they think is real before actually taking over their mind. For Mindwipe's 19th level, he gains access to his 10th rank spells, and becomes a legendary spellcaster along with that. His skill increase makes him an expert in intimidation, to make use of that intimidating glare that we took earlier, before he grabs Incredible Investiture, a general feat inspired by his fascination with mysticism, that will let him don and make use of more invested items, drawing upon more magical trinkets than most can. Closing in on the end of the build, we're going to start with his ability boost, which will be going to his Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, and Charisma. This boost to Intelligence nets him another skill increase that he can spend to become trained in Diplomacy, fitting in with his other Charisma-based skills. Out of the Psychic Capstone feats, Become Thought just doesn't fit. He doesn't really rely on the Unleashed Psyche to get the full value out of Twin Psyche, and with his focus on controlling spells, unlimited potential isn't the best either. This leaves him with mind over matter, which is by no means a bad feat, as it nets him a second 10th rank spell slot, that he can of course spend on spells that he picked up there, or on heightened dominates, and similar effects. I flip-flopped about on his final skill feat as well before I finally settled on Bizarre Magic. I think Mindwipe being an alien, and in particular an alien from a race that doesn't really buy too much into the mysticism, should make his magic suitably difficult for people to identify. Maybe letting him hide the fact that he has taken over a victim in the first place, and making their sudden change a sure surprise. This gives a pretty solid character to play with already, but if you were to wing it in a free archetype build, in addition to the Familiar Master archetype, you could absolutely check out the Captivator dedication. It is all pre-master stuff, so it's a bit iffy, but it has a focus on enchantment and illusion, with the first of those two fitting really well with his ability to control others. Aside from the extra spells that this can grant him, which are charisma based, he has stuff like Reactive Charm to cast them quicker, and Effortless Captivation to maintain this control over others without spending his actual actions. As the dawn draws near, we must ensure that our affairs are in order before we return to our slumber. Mindwipe is a warrior automaton psychic, with a wandering reverie subconscious mind and then a silent whisper conscious mind. He also has the false medium background, which reflects his failed attempts to contact the dead of his people, turning up only TV broadcasts for all his trouble. His ancestry does a good job of representing his alternate mode, with enlarged chassis bringing him up to a classic Cybertronian stature, and arcane propulsion letting him transform into his aerial alt mode, such as a Boeing MQ-28 Ghost Bat if you want to be real cool. His hypnotism abilities start pretty minor, with the likes of Command, but it then expands with Hypnotize, Suggestion, and finally Dominate to fully seize control of a victim. Clear Mind lets him take away the fear of his allies, while he can cause his enemies to start questioning their own with Paranoia. Soothe features some ability to protect and restore the minds of others, while Rewrite Memory lets him change or remove the memory of others at his own whim. He can even explore his strange ability to detect things beyond the normal ken of others, through his Sixth Sense psychic feat. Rather than actually giving him a Viper pistol, he'll simulate its paralytic abilities with Paralyze and Phantom Prison to lock down enemies. His binary bonded partner Vorath shows up as a familiar thanks to Familiar Master, and its feats make him an intelligent scientist that tries to balance out Mindwipe's flights of fancy. This metal mentalist molds minds to menace, manipulating mates to match in a magnificent melee he manages to miss with his own mechanical might. Our Halloween party is shaping up, and what a guest list it's got. This was a blast to build, mostly because I'm absolutely in love with Transformers, but be sure to let me know what you think of it, and what other characters you'd like to see built down in a comment. If you want to see the other builds I've done, see some item suggestions for this build, or join the discussion on future builds, be sure to check out the Monster Monday blog, Twitter, or Discord, all of which are linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and have a frightful Friday.
Who dares to trespass within my Energon sanctuary?